Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I am Scott Warr. And for many of us, in fact, if you've been running out there for any amount of time, you've probably fallen into this spot. Many of us have had times where we've had to interrupt our running, whether it was due to life circumstance or injury or whatever. And returning back to running is something that can be really difficult.
Scott, you might say it's one of the hardest hills out there on the trail is getting back on top.
Exactly. Well, the other day, I don't know how I got it, but I'm glad that I did. A blog post from Katie Arnold, who we've had on the podcast before back at the end of 2019. I saw this blog post and it was really good. The title of the blog post was Beginner's Mind Micro Running. And I thought, that sounds interesting. So I read it. And I don't know how many times I pinged Don on his text. And I said, Don, you have to read this blog post. It's so good. And then, of course, Don doesn't respond. And I go, hey, Don, have you read that blog post yet? It's really good. And then we go on a run. Hey, Don, have you read that blog post? It's so good. You got to read it. We got to get Katie on. Well, anyway, we've been lucky to be joined by Katie Arnold, who's going to talk about this beginner's mind. If you don't know who Katie is, she's a distinguished figure in the world of outdoor journalism. She's an elite ultra runner. I think back when we had her on in 2019, you had just finished and won Leadville 100. Is that right? Was it 2019?
Yeah, it was actually 2018.
2018.
2018. I won Leadville.
So she knows how to run. She knows how to run far. She knows how to write. She has been a writer and editor for Outside Magazine. She has an article there, or a column there called Rising Rippers. And we're glad to have her on to kind of talk about her journey. And the first question as we get into this, Katie, you're an elite runner. You've been running all your life. In fact, that was the title of the first book. The title of the first book was Running Home with Katie Arnold. Tell us about your journey since the last time we talked back at the end of 2019.
Oh, wow. Well, like for all of us, it's been a wild ride, right? There was the pandemic in the middle of it, canceling lots of races. There was just sort of the slow, steady march of time. And I have two children. And when your kids change and grow, your kind of habits and rhythms change, by necessity. I started working on another book after Running Home came out and was met with so much positive response. And so my running, I've always been a runner. I've been a runner since I was 7 years old. In fact, yesterday for Women and Girls in Sport Day, or the day before, I posted maybe my first photo as a runner. I was 8 and I was doing a 10K run just on a whim. And the photo is funny because I'm wearing like a matching cotton short set. And this is my favorite part. It really captures like both sides of my personality. Around my neck, I have my diary key on a string. And it's like the whole race, it was there. I can't figure that out. Like maybe thought someone might read my diary when I was running. Anyway, I've been running for a long time. I've competed for the last 12 years in sort of the ultra scene. But in the past few years since we last spoke, I've kept competing, racing. I've had surgery this last a year ago. And that has really forced me to sort of reckon with my relationship to running. I mean, running for me is forever. That's non-negotiable. As long as my body can do it, I'm a runner and I'll be a runner. What's the name of the book? Once a Runner.
Always
anyway,
a runner,
that's me. Yeah. And, but the thing that was starting to shift for me was kind of the capital S sport of ultra running, right? The competition, the racing. And that may be in part because I've been doing it so long, and like any human, our interest shifts or grow, evolve. Maybe it's, a result of my surgery and seeing or feeling some of my body's limitations, or at least my body speaking to me and telling me, like, hey, maybe we don't want to go that far. Also, I'm 52. There's, I've been in it a long time. And like I said, running is forever, but I've just been questioning kind of the sport of it, right? The sort of public, the hype, the kind of like infrastructure around it, all the stuff that we think we need to do to be a runner. The workouts, the coaches, the Strava, the products, the shoes, the really expensive shoes, all of that. And I'm kind of a contrarian by nature, or a little bit of an outlier. And so whenever something gets really mainstream or hyped, or this is the way and it's very complicated, I'm also a minimalist. I start to kind of question. And so I've just been in that questioning mode, I'd say for the last 2 or 3 years. And it also, I should say, I question kind of the impact this kind of running has, like when we're traveling so far to run races that are really distances we could do in our own backyard.
You know, Katie, as you're talking about that and describing your feelings and your ponderings, I think back to, Don, I just lost his name.
Well, let me help you. Who are you thinking about?
Burns.
Bernd Heinrich?
No. Who's our friend? Matt Lambert. Matt Lambert.
Oh,
I'm thinking of Matt Lambert.
Lamb chops.
Chops. Who's a guy that we see out on the trail, local of Auburn, grew up in Auburn, and he's out on the trails running all the time. And I remember the first few times I met him, I kind of say, "How come I never see you at the races?" And he goes,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I just run because I love to run." And I thought about that, and I've pondered about that a lot, because when I first started into trail running and ultra running, it was all about the races. What's the next race? What's the next race? And I've loved looking at Matt Lambert as an example to say, you know what, it doesn't have to be races. It could be just about getting out there. So I love that you've had this thought pattern go through your head. Where are you now in your thought pattern?
Well, I mean, just to go back a second, like that's actually how I've always been a runner, right? I started very young. It was never about the racing. I did this 10K race once a year at my dad's place in Virginia as kind of a lark. And I never ran cross country or track. I did other sports in high school. And in my 20s, I would like dabble in races. So I might do one and then have a great success and be like, running for me was always a very personal, like private expression. As a writer, it's also very much linked to my writing process, and how I write is by running. When I move my body in the wilderness, especially, like it's nature is a big part of it for me. My mind wanders and I move my imagination. And so writing and running have always been inextricably linked. And so as I would dabble in races, I think I deep down knew that there was a risk to that, because if it became for me all about the competition or the racing or the results, that I would lose that very like intimate, original relationship I had with running. So I would just sort of dip my toe in, and then it'd be a couple of years before I'd race again, and then I'd race and I'd like win, but it was only after my father died, and that's what I write about in Running Home, where I really needed the distance as a healing mechanism for me to sort of run through my grief. And that's when I started competing. And I had great success from the get-go. I love running, and there's a place for racing, and I liked it. I liked having to prepare. I liked how every time I started a race, I had no idea how it would go. That really connects to sort of my Zen practice, which is that mindset of beginner's mind. Even if you have a lot of experience, you come to something fresh, like open to what will happen, not sure of the result you want. And so it's this openness of spirit. And so I would come to my races like that, and they would always teach me something, and I loved it. And I'd probably still be doing it to the extent that I was, had I not broken my leg on a river in the wilderness, which is the subject of my next book, which is coming out in April, called Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World. And I broke my leg. And anyway, there's been some kind of repercussions from that in recent years that I just listen to my body. I'm never on my watch. I'm certainly not on Strava. And so when my body talks to me and is like, we're not feeling this long run, I need to listen.
I want to talk a little bit about that beginner's mind. It really it fascinates me that you like to show up to a race and just let it happen, let it unfold in front of you and manage what happens. And you find joy in the fact that you're free to and open to anything that comes to you. And you think of it, it sounds like there's a lesson in it, and I'll learn the lesson by being here.
Exactly.
And I've done a lot of, not preparing for races just because I thought I'm lazy, but maybe I'm connecting with you. Maybe I like that, to see it come and unfold in front of me and try to learn something. Maybe I'm a Zen runner. I thought I was just a lazy, unprepared runner.
No, I think you're a flow runner, right? So Zen and flow are similar, right? It's being present and not fixating or gripping hard to a certain outcome or result, but being open to what is unfolding. I will say a key ingredient to flow state and to beginner's mind is preparation. And so you have to do the work to prepare to get to the start line. So I'll use Leadville as an example, right? I did the work. I ran and I trained. I did it my way. I didn't have a training plan. I didn't have a coach. I didn't log my miles. But I knew by listening to my body that I was prepared. I had done a series of races, kind of build up. And so I knew when I got to the starting line at Leadville that I had done everything I could. And then when you come in with that mindset, you can totally turn it over and be like, okay, show me. And I think of it as like actually like having this like switch that I flip inside of myself to receive mode. So it's like, I literally picture like I have this button or a switch that I just switch it to receive. And it's like, okay, now I'm receiving. So whatever's happening will be, like I'm receiving something, and it's always going to take me to the next place, like win, lose, drop, whatever. And I've done all three. And there's actually no difference between winning and losing. And I can say that because after I ran and won Leadville, my next 100-miler was in 2022. So I took some years away from the distance because that too is a sort of a knee-jerk response in ultra, is to be like, what's next? How are you going to top that? And it's like, everyone has their race calendar mapped out for the year. I don't. Everyone has the next thing. That is laudable. And I think that's a certain kind of runner. And I'm not that runner. And so after I won Leadville, I felt like I needed to pay it its due and to respect the experience and not quickly like paper over it or try to go beyond it. And so when I went to do my next 100, the pandemic interrupted and sort of pushed the timeline back. It was 2022 and I had, I was at Run Rabbit Run, and I started in the hares field, which is the faster field. And I probably was running in the top 5 or 6 for, the first 50 miles. And then something happened where it was really wet and I irritated the back of my knee and I could not run. So I ended up walking the last 50 miles of the race. And at the time, I guess I knew why I was doing that. Well, I don't quit, right? And I could still move. And, but boy, let me tell you, walking 50 miles is so much harder than running it. And, your sense of time gets so skewed and you're like, why is this taking so long? Anyway, I finished dead last among the hares. Like I actually lost, right? And the next morning I woke up and, the misery, the physical misery notwithstanding, when you wake up after 100 miles, like you think you've died, like everything in your body hurts. The emotional inside was exactly the same as winning Leadville. It was that like disbelief that I'd done it. It was this kind of crazy euphoria. It was like a deep humility that I'd had to ask for so much help and receive it. And there was no difference. And if I had said that before, like, oh, winning and losing are the same, that sounds so trite, right? Sounds so like fake new age. It's totally true. Like, I can't imagine a race being lost. Like, even when you actually literally lose.
Katie, I am so glad that we've had this conversation. I can identify myself now as a flow runner, and I didn't know I was. And I take pride in the fact that I do the preparation. I make sure I hit all the marks. I've done the miles. I feel good about the prep, and I'm ready. But then I show up with a ready body, and then I'm just whatever happens. I've got the work behind me, so now everything is ahead of me. And I
Yeah.
thought that's just because I was, not a good preparer, and I didn't have a spreadsheet tucked in my sock. But
No,
now,
you have beginner's mind. You're
yes,
running with beginner's mind, right? And you
ooh,
can do that when you can be in flow because you know you've done the work. If you show up and you're like, oh, I didn't respect the distance, I didn't respect whatever, like there's going to be all these sticky things that you catch on and you're going to be filled with self-doubt. But if you show up knowing, hey, I've done my best and I'm here and this is as, as ready as I can be in my notebook, because I keep notebooks, I write, I guess you call them diaries, in the notebook that I kept during that Leadville buildup. The night before Leadville, I wrote, I'm ready. It's my time. And I had no idea that I would win. I certainly was not going into it trying to. I didn't even know who else was racing. That's what I mean by coming in prepared but open, beginner's mind.
We didn't know this was going to be an intervention for Dawn. This
I know.
podcast episode.
Are we even did you hit record, Ryan, or is this just for me?
Hey, Katie,
Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
There's a part in your blog post that was emotional to me. The way that you wrote, you're such a good writer.
Thank you.
Where you talk about, you're a lifelong runner. You've become a ultra distance runner, and a lot of us that are listening to this have gone to those longer distances, and you got to a place where you couldn't go out and run as long as you could, as you had been. And sometimes we get in this frame of mind that, the short run is an 8-mile run. And it's not even worth lacing up your shoes for 5 miles. And heaven forbid it's a waste of time to go out for 2 miles. Right. How do you as a lifelong runner balance that that condition where your mind says, I'm a runner, I'm an ultra runner, I go out and run 8 miles, with feeling and listening to your body that says, nope, you're not. But I'm still going to be a runner. I'm still going to go do the 1 mile around the block or whatever. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's like I am running, like I do the running to be the runner. And so I guess what I just do is go back to beginner's mind, which I write about in that newsletter, which is like when I first started running, I ran that race, that 10K. So whatever, that's 6 miles, but let's be honest, I'm sure I was walking half of it. So, but when I first started really having like a daily running practice, I was probably 12 or 13, and 2 miles. That was a big deal. Like I lived in New Jersey. We lived in the country. The blocks were like probably 2 miles around, a big block. And past the farm fields, and I had my yellow sports Walkman, and it was like 2 miles was great. Like I never questioned that. And so I knew that I ran all summer this past summer, and my body started talking to me. Like I was just having a lot of pain, and when the doctor went in last November to take out the plate that I'd had put in after I broke my leg in the wilderness, he's like, you have a lot of arthritis. And that's like the most horrifying word you can hear as an ultra runner. Like it's that like A word, like just don't put that in my mind. And he's like, do you want to see your x-rays? And I'm like, I do not want to see the x-rays. Like, I don't need a visual of that. Right. Like my body will tell me. And so I ran, and I think I was trying to get back, right? Get back to me, the person who won Leadville, who could run, for hours and not blink an eye. Boy, now like you treasure those moments. And in the summer, I think my body was like, hey, I'm done trying to get back. We're going to have to start over. And so I took a while, maybe all fall, I was running like twice a week, which is totally new for me. But I would still do the like 6 or 7 miles, also quite short for me. And my body wasn't feeling better, only running twice a week. And I was like, at my age, actually, it's probably better to move every single day. So that's when I knew, when I came up with this weird idea that like maybe the cure for running was running. And the
Right.
only way I could do that though was to retrain myself how to run really short. And the only way that I would take a mile as like an actual run was if I was running every single day. Because then you need some days that are short. And so it was like this radical reprogramming of that ultra runner's brain, which says like, I'm like you, anything under 8 miles was a short run. And under 5, like, why bother?
Right.
You don't even put
that's why.
your kit on for that. You just go out in whatever you're wearing.
Well, okay. So exactly. So that's what I've been doing. So like, I've been retraining myself a mile. Some days that's all I have time for, or that's all my body wants. Like I live in New Mexico. And so I do a lot of skinning up the mountain, like a lot of ski-mo. The other day we had a ski-mo race in the afternoon. And I was like, well, I'm not going to go do 4 miles today, which now is sort of a long run for me. So I just did 1. And I ran out the door in what I was wearing, which is like my thick cotton sweatpants. And so it's like totally back to my roots of like, yeah, I'm running in sweats. I'm 14 again. It actually feels pretty great. Because you you just don't care. You can do anything for 10 minutes or whatever it takes to run a mile around the trails. I'll literally say to my husband, I'm going for my little jog. I'll be back in like 8 or 9 minutes. And he's like, I used to be gone for hours.
See, and that I love that whole beginner's mind transition or paradigm shift where that's okay. And I love it also that you're, I don't know whether you lost the identity of being a runner, but you've reinforced it with these short micro runs, as you put in your article,
or redefined it.
Redefined it. Yeah. And I sort of called it micro running kind of in jest, because when I said that, I was like, I'm a micro runner now. And my older daughter, who's 15, she's like, Mom, you might be insulting people who like just, that's their distance. And I was like, well, I don't mean to be. But like, I think I was trying to play with this idea that we always need labels, or that we think we need labels. And boy, do we get attached to that word ultra. And that's what I'd been noticing in recent years. Like I would go to these races and people would be new to the ultra distance. And, they would tell me after. I remember I did a race at McDowell Mountain Frenzy, a 50 mile. And during the race, I always talk to people and like gab on the trails. And one woman was like, this is my first 50K. Like now I'm officially an ultra runner. Mm-hmm. And like, sometimes the labels help us because they do sort of like lift us into the next phase. But then you wear the label long enough and it actually begins to hold you back, I think, or it becomes to narrow and limit you. And, just when I thought about like, boy, I always used to run like 2 or 3 miles. I'd come home from school, like make a PB&J, go for a run. Like that was a good day,
Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, no. And it's the same thing now. Like, honestly, if I go running for 3.5 or 4 miles and then come to my desk and sit down to write, like I kind of can't think of anything better because I need to move before I write. But do I need to spend 3 hours doing it? Like I'm being much more productive. Like, let's just say I've got a bunch of books I'm working on now because I'm not running as much.
I love the term micro runner and an ultra runner. I think that it's not offensive at all.
Yeah.
And I think it applies to all of us, every one of us. Some of our runs are micro and some of our runs are ultra. And for some, ultra might be 5 miles and for some it might be 100 miles, right? It doesn't matter. We all individually have our own definition of a micro and an ultra, and we should be okay with that. You said earlier, giving yourself permission or grace, or, maybe you didn't use those words, but accepting it and being absolutely okay with it and not beat yourself up if you don't hit the marks of 5 years ago. That's one of the best gifts that you can give to yourself, is not holding yourself to the past, because, the past is the past. It's very hard. You need to be present at that time and be okay with your new definition of micro and ultra and embrace it. I think it brings happiness, right, to ourselves. Yeah. We can be happy.
It's so easy. I mean, it's, do I want to run ultra distances again? Yeah. And do I think I probably will? I hope so. But I'm not holding fast that that's the only option. Like, I want to move my body in the wilderness, like until like my last day on earth. So that's probably going to change the way it looks. It's certainly going to change how, the pace I'm going, but I'm taking the big picture. And people always love to be like, when they see you, they're like, you still running? And I'm like, I don't know, like running is life. Like I've always run. Like, and they kind of
Right.
want the answer to, they want there to be like a door that slams shut. And I'm like, yeah, I'm running. I'm alive, aren't I? Like I am running. And I saw a friend the other day at the chiropractors, and I asked her the same thing because she's a climber and she had a bad accident last year. And I was like, you still climbing? And then as soon as I said that, I kind of like caught the words and I was like, of course you are. And she's like, of course I am. I'm alive. And she's like, I'm not climbing as well. And I was like, perfect. That's exactly it. And you just kind of have to move the mark. Like I see a lot of times on my runs up the mountain where I live in Santa Fe, I'll see a guy who's like probably in his 80s. And he has totally moved his mark. I'm sure back in his day, he could do it 5 times as fast or 5 times as far. But the bottom line is like for him in that moment, that is so badass to see this guy on the side of the mountain. You know what I mean? And so you just have to keep moving your mark and knowing that your mark is going to move.
And it can move either direction at any time. Right to your point. Sorry to jump in front, Scott.
I was going to say Don gets a little bit nauseous by how many times I bring this up, but I still have not pulled the trigger to make hats and T-shirts with this logo on it.
Oh yeah, I know now.
But this is a mathematical equation. If you think back to your elementary school math class, 1 is greater than 0.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 is greater than nothing. It doesn't matter what that 1 is. Is it 1 mile? Is it 1 block? Is it 100 miles? 1 minute.
Yeah.
As long as you do something that's better than non-action.
I like that a lot.
And I think that you're reinforcing this. I don't know Zen Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
You mention it in the blog post, and it's a theme in your new book that's coming out in April.
Yeah,
is that right?
April 16th.
And just a teaser, we already committed Katie to come back on when that book is released, and we're gonna do a full podcast on it. But can you explain we've talked a little bit about the beginner's mind, but how does that play into Zen Buddhism? And then the second question is how do we translate that into our identity as runners?
That's a great question or questions. So, I mean, it's basically at the foundation,
He's famous for
of
that.
Zen. Yeah. Do you have another 4 hours? No, I'm kidding.
I was going to add another question on top of those two, just to make it a little more interesting, Katie.
Okay. I come to Zen Buddhism not as a spiritual religion, but as a way of being. And so I am, a very curious person. And like I said, I've been a writer and runner my whole life. So I'm always interested in process and kind of how we do the things we do. And one of the ideas in Zen Buddhism is this idea of non-duality, right? So like no extremes, not good, not bad, not black, not white, but kind of everything is interconnected and affects something else. And also everything is impermanent. Nothing at all stays the same. And so, and then this is good as an ultra runner, you're like this. The other component to Zen Buddhism is suffering. Suffering is universal, right? I think as runners, we can all appreciate the aspect of suffering. And so, but the key to suffering or relieving suffering is not grasping to one extreme or the other or one answer or another, but sort of being open to the fact that we're all connected. We're all interconnected. And so that means that the way we parent our children is connected to how we run. And the way I write is part of my running. So there's no distinctions. And so beginner's mind, which really comes from, it dates way back in Buddhism, but it comes from this book that came out in the early 70s. That's this very classic text that kind of became my running and healing Bible after I had this terrible accident and was told I should not run again. And that book is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And so there's all this wisdom in that book and the author passed away. He was a Japanese Zen Buddhist monk. He died in 1971. But all his wisdom, he's talking about sitting meditation, or in Zen, that's called zazen. And that's that state of emptying your mind and sort of being in stillness to where you can feel the interconnection and the impermanence of all things. So he's writing about sitting. But as soon as I read that book, I totally understood everything because I interpreted it through running, right? And so you can take his sort of instructions or his teachings on sitting meditation and apply it to anything you do, be it running, podcast host, writing, if you're a piano player, a nuclear scientist, anything. And one of the foundational teachings is coming in with an open mind and sort of and stripping away all the things you think you know, the sort of ego, what your ego is telling you to do, or I should be running this pace, or I'm an elite runner, you know, kind of taking it all down and coming in with a fresh mind.
I think that is, it sounds appealing. It may sound easy, but I think in practice, it's probably very difficult to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is difficult. But then when you think about it, like, aren't we always screwing up and making mistakes and kind of botching the job, whether it's like parenting or, oh my God, I wish I'd done this instead of that. When the idea of beginner's mind and sort of, taking it and applying it to that situation gives yourself some grace of like, oh, wait a minute, we're all beginners, right? And how boring the world would be if like everything was like just like I thought it would be, right? Or if I knew everything as a writer, how to write a book, like that would be pretty boring. And thank goodness there's so many more things possible than I can imagine. Do you know what I mean? And I think that it just gives us permission to be human. So in some ways, I think it is a hard practice, but I think it's like the foundational practice of being alive.
And maybe by design that we bumble so many things up and miss so many things and make mistakes so that we can learn that. Maybe those are placed in front of us so that we can have that lesson over and over until we finally, as thick as our skull might be, understand that this is how we should take it all in and interpret it and not,
like just give it over, which again does not, I think some people misinterpret Zen as like a passivity, or you're not going for things in your life, or you're kind of just like waiting for things to happen to you. That's not it at all. It means doing something fully all the way to the end, right? But being open that the end might look different than you think. So one of the another big teachings in Zen is called continuous practice. So again, it's referring to meditation. You meditate every day, you show up. It's a continuous ongoing practice, but you can also apply that to running, right? And so in my case right now, I am running every day, but a continuous practice would be like I write about in Brief Flashings. This time I did the rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon, and a little ways down, the first like section to the river, I started feeling fluish and I realized I was sick, and I was so stubborn that I was like, okay, I'm just going to get to the river and then I'm definitely going to turn around, and then I got to the river, and on the ground, I'm not kidding you, there was like 2 dusty Advils. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to put the Advil in my pocket, and then I'm going to run a little ways. Because in my state too, I was like, maybe they're like hallucinogens. And like, I'm such a goody two shoes about that stuff. I was like, maybe it's some kind of drug. And so I was like, I'm just going to run a little ways until I see someone who can tell me what they are. So, anyway, I won't tell the whole story because I write it in Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World. But I run across the Grand Canyon and back, totally sick with the flu. And I was too stubborn to ever turn around. And I threw myself up on the South Rim, like just in a puddle of exhaustion and tears. And I was so ashamed that I had kept going, because I was like, that is so stubborn, like that's remote. It's like, you don't do that. And I finished and I went home, and I have this great friend, and a lot of this book is about our friendship. And she's a Zen, longtime Zen practitioner, and she's in her 70s. And she's like, Katie, that's true Zen. You just kept going. And it recasted. I mean, it still seems super stubborn, and like I was definitely never going to tell my mother what I'd done. But when I thought about it that way, it's like seeing something all the way through, right? Sticking with it, not getting tossed away by your inner thoughts or kind of circumstance, and just staying with it, if that makes sense, staying with the practice. And sometimes continuous practice means you do have to stop, right? So you can get up and do it again the next day and you're not like maimed forever in the dirt. But it's this kind of lifelong, I don't know, for lack of a better word, devotion, right? It's like, I am a runner. I run, like, and this is my practice. And the word practice, even, I so love compared to like training, or because practice in the Zen way is about pursuing something without concern for results, right? So it's not like practice in the sense like probably when you were kids like me, I was like, go practice tennis or go practice your backhand, you know, with this idea you were going to get better. Practice in the Zen way is just doing the thing and doing the thing.
You know, as Don and I were talking about the blog post and this idea of the beginner's mind, he brought up something, and I'm going to have him elaborate on this. That when you're a beginner at something, there's also an emotion involved in being a beginner. Don, you remember that conversation?
I do. You know, there's a spot for everybody in the group, the community, the tribe, whatever you want to call it, that the beginner brings something very special, some enthusiasm, a spark, excitement, a passion. You know, their eyes are wide open and they've discovered something amazing. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, the veteran, who has the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge they can pass down to this new person. There's a spot and a need for both sides of that equation. And when the newbie comes in, they're gifting that to the rest of the group. They've all been there. They all recognize it. They all embrace it and say, wow, this new person has brought this enthusiasm and it's helping all of us. And the new people are just, they don't have any experience. They need to know, if we're talking about running, when to drink, electrolytes, food, tapering. They don't know any of this stuff. And it's just, that's what makes a community so strong, is there's both ends. They both serve one another, and there's a great benefit. And that's to me, that's the trail running community.
That's such a beautiful image. I love that.
And that's why we invite friends out to the trail for the first time, right? I can think of a dozen people that we've invited out to the trail, and it makes me giggle inside when they're running down and they're just going, this is so beautiful. This is so, and then you see them fall and they get, bloody on their shoulders and they're just going, this is the best.
Yeah.
That's why we do it, right?
I know,
to try to get some of that.
It's so special. You want that back, right? But then you have something else instead, which is you have all the wisdom and you have the trial and error and you have that sort of like bedrock of knowing, of like, okay, I know, and trust. It's like I can trust in my own process because I've learned this way, which isn't to say you're closed to new ideas. It's just that I think as much as anything, that's what ultra running has taught me, is to trust my own process and to trust that I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to bring humility to it as well, and be like, you know what, the mountain's always going to have the last say.
Yeah, nature has the last vote, the last at bat, and always wins. But I'm sure this is open for in all communities, whether you're knitting or whether you're a mountain climbing. It doesn't matter. There's still that mix of newbies and experienced, and really, if I was new at something, I would understand this is where I sit, but I also bring something to the group. It's okay for me to get in the mix because I have an ingredient that's very important for this community. And so I
nice
lean
thing
in
about this
and
platform,
get to try
Katie,
it, and I don't feel embarrassed
still
or bashful
recording him,
or
even
not
though
knowing.
he's frozen for us.
I remember when I first started
so,
trail
really
running,
thinking about what
the
he's gonna
things
say
that people would tell me, I was so naive.
There we go. Now you're back, Don.
Oh, I lost. You lost? How much did I lose?
Yeah.
We lost all of it. You may want to start over.
Oh, heck. I'll probably do it better the second time. What I was saying is that no matter what community you're in, whether you're surfing, whether you're hang gliding or ultra running, we all have that same equation. Whether spark comes in with somebody new and wisdom passed along and shared, in that network. And it makes me think that when I do go out somewhere and I'm new at something, it's okay to be new. It's okay to ask questions. And I remember some of the questions I asked when I started trail running, and there was a hill, or a climb, some elevation climb, and I would ask, "Do we run this? Do we walk this? What?" And they'd smile, and part of that smile now I recognize was they asked the same question, 10 years before, right? And their answer was nuanced, and well, it all depends, and I was just like taking it all in. But that's what's encouraging. Anybody that's listening that's new to the sport, you have a spot, and we need you. And it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to hang for the first 25% of the run and then turn. It doesn't matter, because you bring something important to that first 25%. And you're welcome. In the tribe that I know of trail running, you are welcome. Nobody has ever held anybody back. Nobody has seen when that person turned and did their first 25%. Well, we're going to talk about them for the next 75. They probably will talk about you in excitement. And that person has potential. Do you see the way they just naturally pick that up? Their questions they ask were the same questions I asked.
Yeah.
It's really, really good to see that. And I want to encourage people to not feel anything but welcome.
I love that. And also the veterans, I was going to use the word old, the older runners, but let's just say the seasoned, the wisdom runners can always be a beginner again. And I think that's what I'm discovering, in the last 12 weeks or however long I've been doing this little daily, jogging. Sometimes I call it yogging. I'm going out for my little jog. But you can always be a beginner again. You just have to flip it in your mind and come up with a way to do it differently. And I love being a beginner again. I love reteaching myself how to run short. I also am a beginner again in some of my other sort of original sports. I started doing some tennis, and I'm having that feeling of picking up a racket for the first time in so long, but that a sport that's so deep in me, maybe as deep or deeper in me than even running. But not having been on the court for 15 years, it's so exciting. And I'm also doing the same thing a little bit with getting back into mountain biking. In my 20s, before, when I was sort of dabbling in trail running, I was really into mountain biking. And I wanted to race the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, but I never put my name in because I thought, you're going to laugh, that 12 hours on my bike would be insane amount of time. Anyway, fast forward, I do the run, and I put my name in, and I'm going to do the mountain bike this summer. And I'm totally freaked out. Yeah. Because here's the thing, I'm resisting the culture, right? I'm not that mountain biker with the kit, with the bibs, I got freaked out because I saw that that you could get this Leadville kit with the bibs. And I was I just want to ride on my flat pedals. I just want to ride my bike. I want to ride my bike. And then I was that's okay. That's how you're going to ride and train for Leadville. You're just going to ride your bike a lot. You're not going to call it training. I have no idea how it's going to go, but I know that it's an original thing in me because I'd wanted to do it in my 20s. And when you kind of go back to those things that are always in you and start over, it's so meaningful, right? It's both old and new at the same time.
Boy,
I love that.
I have 3 questions, but I'm going to go with the last one I thought of when you said, you called me earlier, and I'm forever going to remember this, Katie, actually, a flow runner.
You're a flow runner.
Thank you. Doing the work so that you show up confident. You just show up confident. Whatever comes at me, I'm ready. No real plan at all. Just like when you're going to go out on that bike, you feel like this vehicle, and I'm calling your body the vehicle because I think of running, but not your bike as a vehicle. But you as a body can handle just about anything that comes at you. There isn't anything that you're seeing that you can't troubleshoot and find a workaround. You just have that supreme confidence that there's a way through. Yeah. And that's what made me think of that when you said, I'm going to show up there and I'm going to have my flat pedal and I'm going to do it. Done a lot of running, or riding before. So whatever comes at me, I can take care of it. And that's fun.
And it's I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? It's just knowing that, I know what I was going to say. This is really, really important. it ultimately comes down to just being yourself. And someone I knew and know who's very, very wise gave me this advice. And you always hear this, like, be yourself, but it's sort of trite and you can kind of blow it off. But when my first book, Running came out in 2019, and I went out on book tour. And book tour, talk about beginner's mind. You know, you show up at bookstores, you have no idea who's going to come. You know, you've written a book that you believe in. And so that you've done the work, but then you just have to give it over to what happens. And it's like, there might be 50 people, there might be 5, whatever. But before I left, this person, he's like, I just have one piece of advice. And he's like, be real in every moment. And I take that with me. So it's like, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be real in my build up to Leadville, whatever. Maybe that just looks like hopping on my mountain bike and riding around town for a few hours, or just riding for the love of it. And that's always how I've been a runner, is just because I love to do it. And, so I think about showing up at that start line, super intimidating, like all the people on bikes, and like, what happens if I get jostled? And like, you know, and I've done some bike races, and I need to work on my downhill skills. But then I think, you know what, I'm just going to show up my way. I'm not going to maybe I'm not going to wear those bibs, you know, or get all decked out. The kits, like, talk about a turnoff, right? It's like, once something gets a kit, I am out. Like, and so, but that's okay, because I'll just do it my way, and, trust that that's going to be the right way.
But this applies to
Ryan,
anything. It applies to your relationship, your job, it doesn't matter,
you just have
right?
To be
you
real.
just be yourself, be real, do your homework. Don't show up ill-equipped to handle what's in front of you. Don't be a fool. But
don't disrespect it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's an early term. Don't respect the distance. And now back to trail stuff. Don't respect make sure you respect the distance.
Yeah, respect the distance.
Yeah, respect the distance. Don't disrespect, because you'll get hurt. The trail will remind you who's boss. You know, we said nature has the last at bat, right? The trail will remind you and humble you, and it recognizes when you're running with that type of overconfidence, and not preparing, not respecting, and going out too hard, and skipping some kind of hydration because you want to go faster. The trail will let you know, and it will pull you back in.
The trail bites back.
Yes, it does.
But it's also that sort of mindset too that I sometimes worry, again, that the sport, certainly of ultra, is maybe going toward, is that sort of like acquisitional mindset of like, getting things. Like, I'm going to get the distance. I'm going to get 100, and then I'm going to get up to 250. And it feels very like, like a getting, like, instead of a giving. And a lot of times when I'm out running in a race, even if I'm suffering or something, I'm talking to people, and like, especially on some of those out and backs. And I remember at this race, it was like in Moab a few years ago, I think it was a 50-mile, behind the rocks or something. And I was passing a lot of people on my way back in, on their way out. And afterwards, and I just said hi to everyone. And afterwards, someone said, like, you gave so much energy to me on my way out. And I realized that, like, I was getting so much from them, but I also, in that moment that she shared that with me, I realized I was giving. And it's that exchange. And I just sometimes feel like, I worry that give is going when we just kind of keep grasping for like the next big bragging right, or the next big distance. And so maybe a little bit of me is wanting to say, like, okay, let's maybe rethink always having to push. And again, that's maybe just my body is not wanting to. And if I were fully like, if my body was saying go, maybe I'd be signed up for a 250. I don't know.
That's the second time that suffering came up, or shared, companionship in the conversation. And I wrote down on my notes that I have, two vertical lines with an arrow going back and forth, and the word suffering on top of it circled to remind me to come back to this. And so you brought it up, so that helped me as well. When we're out there suffering or working through some hard stuff, because that's what we do, and that's what our bodies were built to do, and by good design, we've been able to work through it and move on. And so that's part of what I think we love about the sport, is we get to experience life in real time, and some of the things that we were designed to do, we get to practice, because we're inside with a thermostat. We don't get to practice it, and our body is designed for it, and it's wired for that, and so it does it. And so these two lines with the arrow in between, I think when we start to work through that, where we're working through it, or we find another that's working through it, and we start working together, and we run together, and we watch end of races when 6 people come in at once, but those 6 people weren't running together until it really got hard. There's something shared, some energy shared, some companionship, something happens when you combine your effort with another person. And I think I haven't figured all that out. I just recognize it, and there's comfort in it, and there's power in it, and there's accomplishment in it when you combine.
And that's what Zen is all about, is that we are all interconnected, right? Like we are one. And I've had moments like that on the trail, and I write about one of them in brief flashings, where I'm at this race in California, the Miwok 100, and it's the race is like just being pummeled by hail and cold and like sleet, and I'd forgotten my gloves at the last aid station because I was, just moving too fast and not being careful, and I'm leapfrogging along the trail with this guy with like tall white knee socks, which, are quickly becoming completely mud splattered and filthy knee socks. And we sort of leapfrog, like I'll pass him on the climbs and he'll get me on the rolling descents, and vice versa. But we're working together. And because I can always see white socks, and later found out his name was Lance. And so Lance, if you're listening, thank you. That we were, kind of in relationship together with also the weather and the ridgeline. And it just, we all have those opportunities. That's what makes racing, coming back to racing again, and why I do love it, even if it's not my primary focus, even if I'm protective of kind of my creative process with running. Racing is when we experience that interconnection.
And when there's more danger, go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry. I know I'm just talking too much to get excited talking to Katie. Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, isn't it interesting, the dichotomy that this going out on a race as an individual runner is not an individual thing.
Never.
And as a beginner, you need to learn that. That at some point you will. But I'm worried a little bit about today's society, where we can easily put earbuds in our ears and go out and do our run and disconnect and make it an individual thing. We need to remember that this is, to your point, Katie, Zen Buddhism. We're all interconnected. Take the earbuds out. Say hi to the person that you're passing, whether it's on a race or a practice, a run, and say hi. Even stop. Don and I had a really good friend, and it used to drive me crazy when he got me into running. We would stop and talk to everybody. And what's the first question you would ask, Don?
What race are you doing? What are you preparing for? What are you getting ready?
What are you preparing for? And we would spend 5 minutes talking to someone, and I'm going, aren't we supposed to be running? Don, come on, we're supposed to be running. And I love that part of this, and I hope that we're not going to lose that interconnectivity. But I think that's an interesting dichotomy, that running is an individual sport, but yet it's not.
Yeah, it's so interdependent on like the volunteers. Like I'm a kind of runner at a race. Like I get so fired up coming into aid station, the people, like it's like taking 4 Advil for me. Like I'll come in and they'll pump me up, and then you go, and it's the other runners, and it's all the crew who helps you. And it's just, it's the whole spirit. And I'll even do that like around town. Like my kids die of embarrassment, but if we're in the car and I see a runner just working, just kind of going for it, just getting it done, no matter like pace, whatever. A lot of times I'll just roll down the window and be like their little like aid station and be like, great job. And my mom, my kids think that like, oh mom, you're condescending. And I'm like, no, I'm actually like, that person is just doing it. They are, and it's an awesome thing to see.
Oh, my kids could have a discussion with your kids, no doubt about it, because I'm in that same boat.
I am like the height of mortification for them, like just my very existence. It's okay though.
The key question there is, when you went to the aid station to get the Advil, did they dust off the dust on the Advil?
Yeah.
Was it in the dust, or was it in a little bowl or a jar? You could have a clean Advil.
No, I mean, like, I don't think I've taken Advil from an aid. I mean, coming into an aid station is like taking Advil. Like, it totally takes the pain away. But I did, yes. Spoiler alert, I did eat the Advil I found at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Were they hallucinogen, or was it?
To this day, I don't know. I definitely hallucinated, but no, I survived. And I did come across a guy, with no joke, 2 hikers, and I like crawled up and I was like, what is this? And I showed him my little, like, and like they'd splotched, like red splotches on my hand, you know, like they'd melted. And I was like, what? And the guy's like, just looked at me with this like pitying look, and then he unzips his backpack and he pulls out, no joke, an entire Ziploc filled to the brim with the exact same pills. And he's like, they're Advil 200. And I was like, you know, thanks. And he's like, do you want some of ours? Because we had clean ones. And I was like, this is when I knew I was super deranged, deluded. I was like, no, I'm just going to eat mine. And I took mine and ran up. And I think they were like, what the hell? So yeah, I survived.
That's awesome.
You know,
hey, Katie, go ahead, Don.
But I was going to make a comment on the rooting for the runner and sticking your, fist out the window and encouraging them on. And I get that same type of thing, not only with runners, but sign spinners. When there's someone that's enthusiastic, spinning an arrow on the side to get some business for somebody
are going
there
for it.
Those people have that, they have it, and they're exhibiting it. And I just get inspired, and I get motivated, and whatever I'm doing, if I'm driving, then I have to be careful not to drive faster. But those guys and gals are really motivating because they're into it, and they don't care what somebody's seeing, and they're trying tricks, and they're missing it. And they don't care, and they're having a good time.
They're fully in it. They are they are Zen practitioners. They are taking it all the way. Same thing. I'll see some guy on the side of the road, like dancing to a boombox. I mean, what is not to love about that? Like, right. That is continuous practice.
Hey, Katie, thank you. This has been a great discussion.
Oh, you guys are a blast.
A great thing to remember, regardless of where you are in your journey as a runner. First of all, remember that is part of your identity. Just keep that in your mind. There's been times in my running where, especially at the beginning, where I thought, I'm really not a runner. I'm kind of just running, but I'm not a runner. But if you once you decide that you are a runner, the practice comes easier. And as the practice comes easier, the identity gets reinforced. And I think that that's really important. I think that's a lesson that you reminded me of, Katie. We are looking forward to our next discussion, hopefully before April when the book gets released. The new book is called Brief Flashings in a Phenomenal World, Zen and the Art of Running Free. We're gonna start thinking of questions. In fact, tomorrow's run, Don, we need to come up with some really good questions. We have an early edition of the book that Katie gave to us, and we're gonna do some serious research, and we're gonna be like Dan Rather on our next podcast. We're gonna really take it to you.
Well,
this has been a great discussion.
Zen Runner is going to be able to put some good questions out there. I know it.
This is great. Well, I enjoyed this so much. I now have the label of Flow Runner that I'm
going to make a T-shirt. I'm going to get you a T-shirt, Don.
All right.
Send me one.
and we will, Katie. That sounds good. And maybe Scott will finally get his "one is greater than none" shirt. And I think that's that's the investment.
I think it's all connected. Yeah, I love it.
Well, thank you. Make sure, whether it's a micro run, an ultra run, or just going to get the mail at the mailbox at the end of the block, go out and run.
Mas.